now the Lowdown, a Down syndrome podcast. Dr. Jillian Rork gives us the lowdown on Down syndrome and dermatology. Over to you, Hannah Mola.
Thanks, Danielle. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LowDOWN podcast. My name is Hina Mahmood. I am an occupational therapist at the DSRF, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Marla Folden, who is a speech-language pathologist at the DSRF. Good morning, Marla.
Hello, Hina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited for today.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. This is a really big topic, and I've been telling some families that we're going to have our guest on today, so they're very excited to learn all things from our guest. But before we continue on with our episode, we would love for you to hit that subscribe button and leave a review of our podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Remember to check out our episode pages for additional resources related to each episode. You can also follow the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation at www.dsrf.org and on Instagram and Twitter by following at DSRF Canada. So on today's episode, we are shifting gears towards a more medical topic, and we will be talking about the body's largest organ, the skin. If you have a loved one with Down syndrome in your life, you have invariably noticed that there can be some skin issues that are lingering and tricky to resolve. So our guest today will help us understand the complex nature of dermatological issues in Down syndrome and also how they can be prevented and treated.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Jillian Rork is a dermatologist practicing in New Hampshire. She attended Harvard Medical School and interned at Mass General in pediatrics. That's where all the exciting stuff is happening.
Yeah.
She now specializes in pediatric care and has also collaborated with the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Research Group, providing insights and education to the other members there, which is super valuable. She's currently an assistant professor of surgery at Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. And she also just published a reviewed article on the skin conditions associated with DS just in August 2021, I think. I just read that.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes her the perfect person for us to talk to today. So hi there, Jillian. Welcome to the LowDOWN podcast.
Well, hello there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure. We have a tradition here at the LowDOWN of starting off with some secret questions that are not scary, just so that our listeners can get to know you a little bit. Are you up for that?
Absolutely. Here we go.
Fantastic. Here we go.
We promise there won't be any math involved. I don't think.
Math. So question number one, if you had to enter in a talent show, what would you like to do? We have a lot of talent shows around here at the DSF.
Yeah, I think I would play my Barry saxophone.
Wow, that'd be super fun.
Yep.
Have you been playing that for a long time?
I have. I've been playing it since high school.
Oh, wow.
And, it took a little bit of time off during school and kids and all that, but I'm back on the swing of things. And I actually just got a Barry saxophone last week. So I would totally bring out my Barry and play some jazz or some funk.
Yeah, fun. Okay, I want to go to that talent show. Yeah. Awesome. Question number two is, what is your favorite brunch food?
Ooh, favorite brunch food is Eggs Benedict.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is the correct answer.
Yes.
With delicious hollandaise sauce, right?
On the West Coast over here, we enjoy a salmon Eggs Benedict. So over, I recommend.
Yeah, there's a crab cakes Benedict over here in New England too. So that's really yummy. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the seafood situation. I was just going to say the seafood situation in New England must just be amazing.
It is absolutely. We should do a lobsters Benedict. I've never had that. That actually sounds good, right?
Very much so.
Question number three. If you could learn a new language with no effort at all, you just kind of absorb it overnight. What language would you be absorbing?
Oh, I think I would go with Spanish. I speak French, but I use it somewhat in the office, but not as much as I wish I could. And so I think I would learn Spanish just so I could communicate better with my patients. And I'd love to travel more in South America. And Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Love it. Okay. I'm going to take over for the last two questions. Imagine you're walking in the forest, nice, calm day, just doing some self-care, and you run across an animal. Which animal would you like to run across while in the forest?
Like to.
Like to.
I think a porcupine.
Oh,
They're kind of waddly and fun.
They're so waddly and they're so slow moving and deliberate. And I think they're pretty adorable.
Yeah. Yeah. And non-threatening from
and
non-threatening.
Non-threatening.
Yeah, so you're not going to
as long as you're not a dog.
Exactly. Yeah. Love that. That's such a great answer. And then our last question, you're very busy and your job requires a lot of, back and forth and going and seeing patients. What is your way to de-stress at the end of the day?
Yeah, so I really like to read at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I like to watch funny TV, watch stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
I like to exercise. I guess I do a couple of things to de-stress,
Right.
but
yeah,
I think all in that category.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting away from medicine, doing something different just to kind of recharge that way.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Excellent. Awesome. Well, thanks for indulging us in that. That was kind of cool. Still love that porcupine answer. I think that's such a great answer. Totally unexpected.
No, I feel like let's just go for a walk in the woods. We can talk about dermatology. That's good. I'm in New Hampshire. We can do it right outside.
So true. All right. So let's kind of start with how did you get into the area of dermatology and specializing in people with Down syndrome?
So I got into the field of dermatology in kind of a roundabout way. I always knew that I wanted to go into pediatrics, but didn't necessarily think dermatology until about fourth year of medical school, right. When I did a formal rotation at Boston Children's Hospital and just fell in love with the field and the people in the field. And I think the working with individuals with special needs was an interest since I was really young. My grandmother was a public school teacher through the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way up until the 80s. And she worked with people with special needs and was a big advocate for inclusion and advocacy. So I kind of learned from my grandmother about how important it was to really advocate and take care of people with special needs. And then my mother was a pediatric physical therapist at Easter Seals when I was a kid. So we did the buddy walks and, it was just kind of a part of my life. And then when I got to medical school, I actually heard Brian Scott Coe talk and I think Nikki Baumer too, and they brought in a couple of families and individuals with Down syndrome into the classroom. And I just really always liked those interactions a lot. And I really liked the physicians taking care of people with Down syndrome. And I would say it was, really my intern year at Mass General. I had again known that I wanted to do, kind of specialize in special needs care in dermatology. And so I got to hang out for a month with Dr. Scott Coe and crew at MGH. And it was really at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, they have so many skin issues. Like, why isn't anyone talking about this? Because you go to the literature.
Yeah.
You go to the literature and there's just like all these case reports of rare things. And while rare things are important, like why isn't anyone talking about folliculitis and dandruff and all this hair loss issues? And, it was really in that clinic, I was like, we've got a lot of work to do here. And then when I started my residency at UMass, they were just starting a multidisciplinary Down syndrome clinic there. And I felt really fortunate that a lot of the doctors there, geneticists, the dermatology practice, was very supportive of me trying to see patients with Down syndrome and kind of worked into my schedule ways for me to be a part of that multidisciplinary clinic. So I think it was really at that point that I started to gain a lot more like kind of clinical experience. And and then I think like the rest is history. I feel like I'm the luckiest person alive. I get to work with pediatric dermatologists seeing kids. And I also get to work with the Down syndrome community seeing kids and adults. And I don't think you could ask for a better group of people to work with. So So,
Yeah.
but it's really, I mean, I really come at this from a perspective of like, there's not a lot about this out there. I think there's humongous gaps in care, and there's a lot we need to learn and a lot we need to improve on. And like, that's what I'm dedicating myself to. Because I mean, almost every week I see somebody in my office and it's just like, oh my gosh, this has been going on forever. Yay, I'm so happy we can fix this. So like the more I can get out and more I can educate like patients and families, because I wish it, and I will tell you, we're starting to build an infrastructure, at least amongst the pediatric dermatology community, to have more providers kind of specialize in this. But there's only so many of us, and we want to be able to provide care to as many people as we can. So I hope this podcast kind of accomplishes that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that I admire the fact that you saw that there was a gap there, and that our community of individuals with Down syndrome did not have somebody specializing in dermatology and not really looking into skin issues. And then you're like, okay, so this is an area of need. I'm going to apply myself to that. So that's kind of how things are going to grow, and we can reach the wider community, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So on that, this leads us beautifully to our next question. So let's talk about skin and hair issues. How common are they in people with Down syndrome? And is there a reason for why we see it so often?
Well, I think they're common. Of course, I have a little bit of bias, right? Because I see them in my dermatology office, but we don't have great statistics behind this. There was one study that said that it was amongst surveyed young adults and their loved ones that at least over 50% of people had a skin complaint. So, and that's up there with like thyroid disease, which we talk so much about with Down syndrome. So I think it is very common. I think that there are certainly dermatologic conditions that are very much so tied to the trisomy of chromosome 21. And then there are ones that just kind of happen, because there's family history of other skin conditions. But I think as we chat today, we'll kind of talk about the downstream effects, mostly on the immune system from the trisomy of chromosome 21 that lead to more skin and hair conditions. So I think it is common. There's a huge phenotypic range, right? Like, so one of the most common things we see is dry skin, and I would think a lot of people with Down syndrome would tell you, yeah, I have dry skin. And then there's other things that are not quite as common, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I just want to clarify that because it is related to trisomy 21 doesn't mean that things are not treatable.
Oh, 100%.
Often what happens is there's a bit of oversight, it's Down syndrome kind of a thing, but that doesn't mean you don't do anything about it.
Oh my gosh, no. Yes. No. Right. And I think like what my goal is with my career, and I can tell you a lot of other people feel this way, is that by elucidating the mechanisms behind the skin conditions that are caused by the trisomy of 21, we can really improve treatment. That's the exciting thing. And so, I do hear that from families, though, exactly what you're saying. It's like, oh, well, my kid has dandruff, but like, whatever, that's just part of Down syndrome. It's like, no. Yeah, you're right. Like people with Down syndrome do have more significant dandruff, but okay, like let's treat it.
Right. You don't have to stay that way. Right.
No.
Good. I'm glad we made
and I
that
think the
point.
common
That's important.
Yeah, very important. And I think the common misconception is like that, oh, it's just dandruff, or it's just dry skin, but it's not easy to live with on a day-to-day basis, right? So for a lot of our guys that may not be able to either communicate that to us, or they're not understanding how it's feeling, doesn't mean that it shouldn't be treated. And won't improve their quality of life. So it's not just dandruff. It is something that's annoying to have for them too. So
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, from a symptom standpoint, meaning like persistent scalp itch. I mean, I've taken care of a lot of patients like, they're trying to concentrate in school and their scalp is really itchy. So they're itching, or they have calluses all over their feet and they can't really walk so well. And gee, if we could address that dry skin. But then I also think, we really need to pay attention to, physical appearance and that matters for people regardless. And so having white flaky scale all over your shirt, like we just need to do that.
I mean, we would worry about it when it's that. What if it's us having the issue we're worrying about it? So why would it be any different, right? So
Absolutely.
They need to also be cognizant of it.
And it's absolutely not helping our overarching goal of being included, right?
Oh,
our
certainly.
Students are different enough. And we don't need those extra things to make them more
Working
different or more othered.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Absolutely.
So one issue that we see very often, especially like a lot of mine and Marla's clients are having a challenge with alopecia. So let's talk a little bit about why alopecia happens. I have a few follow-ups, but for our listeners, can you maybe just define alopecia for them so they can get a good understanding of what exactly it is?
Sure. And I wanted to ask, in what kind of alopecia? Is it the hair loss of little circles of hair throughout the scalp, or is it like thinning of the hair as a person gets older?
Both.
Both. Because I think in that answer, you've already educated me that there are different kinds of alopecia. So we're good to know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the most common one that we see in the pediatric population and adolescent population is something called alopecia areata, which is a autoimmune form of alopecia. And this is more common in Down syndrome because of the associations with autoimmune conditions and immune dysregulation. And we actually don't know that much about this in Down syndrome. We have these clinical observations. We all have them, but we just don't have a lot of research really thoroughly describing them. I will tell you from the research and from my clinical experience, alopecia areata tends to appear younger in people with Down syndrome. So I would say ages 5, 6, 7. Okay.
Early school years. There's a huge range. So on what it looks like. So alopecia areata classically looks like little circles of hair loss. So a lot of people will say they'll be like little quarter sizes of hair loss, and they're very, very well defined. So it's like you could take a marker and draw a circle around where it is. Okay. And some people will have like a few circles of this kind of hair loss on the scalp. Other people will lose all of their hair. It's very hard to predict, what's going to happen once you lose one little circle. Either that could stay or you could lose all of your hair. And then the most extreme form of alopecia areata is something called alopecia universalis, where you would then lose your eyebrows and eyelashes. Okay. Yeah.
So huge range. I would say we don't know in Down syndrome, what is the most common kind. There are some case reports or case series, I should say, that say, oh, well, Down syndrome, alopecia areata is always more severe. It's a more severe case, meaning more people will have all of their hair lost or their eyebrows and eyelashes included. But I don't always see that in clinics, so I don't know if we can necessarily say that, but I do think we see it younger in age. Now, the reason why we think we see it more commonly and perhaps younger is that chromosome 21 contains a gene called the AIRE gene, AIRE. And when we've studied alopecia areata, we know that gene is really important. And dysfunction in that gene can kind of lead to alopecia areata. And so having 3 copies of it, perhaps that's one reason why we see it. And that gene is, and that kind of mechanism of alopecia areata with the immune system is super closely related to hypothyroidism, which we know is really common. So it's like similar pathway for both conditions. Okay. There's also other, and we'll probably touch upon this later, but there's other immune dysregulation with Down syndrome that we're just starting to understand with something called interferon alpha. And there's actually a couple of genes on chromosome 21, again, that have to do with interferon, specifically interferon receptor. So we think having 3 copies of chromosome 21 and more of this interferon receptor might also kind of predispose people towards alopecia areata. So, yeah, and that's kind of interesting because, as we were talking about earlier, like treatment.
Yeah.
So there are certain treatments that kind of target interferon more than others, and that's why we think that, they might be more helpful with alopecia areata. We can talk about that in a minute. So,
sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's kind of was where I was headed in that direction. So, I mean, considering that the expression of the 21st chromosome makes it more likely that they're going to experience alopecia areata. So there's nothing that you can really do to prevent it. Am I correct? Right. So
no.
So what can we do to, I mean, from your perspective, is alopecia, can it be permanent? Could it reoccur throughout the lifespan? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. So this is one of those conditions where I always say, I wish more than anything I had a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Because for some people, alopecia areata is a very short-lived thing. Like they have it for a year or two, they grow their hair back. You never see it again. It just parts ways. There's other people who they'll always have some small patches of alopecia areata, but they'll be tiny and, not too bothersome. For other people, it might all grow back. And then 10 years later, they might lose all their hair. And then that might all grow back. And then that never happens again. And then there's other people who just lose all of their hair and they never grow back, period. It's very tricky to know. So it's kind of, and that's an annoying answer to have to give as a doctor, but it's just the truth. You never know.
Yeah. And that's like that with so many things that you can't necessarily, especially with autoimmune stuff, because it can just kind of come out of nowhere. But before we jump into treatment, I know that, is there a connection between anxiety and stress and not necessarily the overall prevalence of alopecia, but maybe the expression of alopecia being worse? Because we've noticed that with some of our students here, where if there's stress, is, whether it's household stress from parents or they themselves are stressed or anxious, it seems to be worse for them. Is there a connection?
I think it's a really difficult thing to answer because it's an extremely difficult thing to study. I mean, I will tell you that in general, like, I try to shy away from saying like you being stressed out is causing your alopecia areata. Because the last thing I want people to feel is like this is their fault. And I will tell you that's from working with a couple different hair specialists through the years. Like it's just a really hard thing to study. Now, that said, do I think that the immune system is intimately related with our stress levels and that whole system in our body? Like, absolutely, I do. But I think there's lots of other things going on. I agree with you at times, I've had some of my patients lose parents and then their alopecia explodes, but it's not always the case. So we always say, I don't want you to think that this is your fault, but if you're having stressful times in your life, like there's absolutely no downside to trying to address that and improve that. Now, whether or not it will improve your alopecia areata, I don't know, but it's always worthwhile addressing. I tend to find with alopecia areata, even more so than other conditions, like a lot of blame is is put on by the patient feels responsible for it. And even more so the parent or loved one. It's like, what did I do to have this happen? Because it's such an emotional and it's a disfiguring condition. It's not something that you can hide easily, right? I mean, hair is such an integral part of our self-identity. So
absolutely.
I tend to try to,
we should be clear that it's not in our clinic. It's not like every time we see a stressed out kid, the next week they come and they're bald.
Oh,
that's not the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly. Oh my heavens. Same thing in my practice.
There's plenty of stressed out kids who don't go bald. So
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I do want to say something before we move on to treatment that I think is really, really important. That I always try to say, regardless of like who I'm talking to, dermatologists, pediatricians, or parents or patients. Let's say that you do develop alopecia areata. The really, really important thing to do is to make sure that thyroid screening is up to date. Okay. Because having alopecia areata can be a sign of a thyroid condition. Okay. So, and we should be doing annual thyroid screening, so it's at birth 6 months and then annually up until I think 20, 21 years. And then after that, it can be every 1 to 2 years. But I would, I always just check like, okay, is thyroid screening up to date? And hey, if it's 10 months ago, we're going to check it now, to see. Yeah. So that's really, really important to know that.
Awesome. So let's then move on to treatment. So our parents that are listening and out there, what can they do? What's been shown to work? What's out there?
Yep. Yeah. So I always like to take a step back when we start talking about treatment and say the following: we never want the treatment to be worse than the condition itself. And that's a huge mouthful, but like, that's really important. So alopecia areata, I would say in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see some huge breakthroughs with treatment. And we're already kind of starting to see those, and there are clinical trials in place for those to be put in place. But right now, like what I have in the pediatric population is not, there's not really too much out there. But that doesn't mean we just throw our hands up and like say, this is, we're done with this. So there are topical options. Okay. And in that category, most often topical steroids. Okay. And obviously you're going to have to consult with your healthcare provider on what strengths to use. But one thing I always like to empower patients and families with is knowing that topical steroids come in different vehicles. And what I mean by that is they don't all just come in creams or greasy things like ointment, like a Vaseline. They come in foams, they come in solutions, and they come in like really runny lotions. Because I've definitely had patients referred into me with and without Down syndrome that their very well-meaning provider gave them a prescription for a topical steroid because they knew that was the right thing, but they gave them an ointment or a cream. And it's like, how are you going to hide that in your hair? With all this gunky stuff. Like blah. Okay. So that goes, the treatment should never be worse than the condition itself right there. Okay. So knowing that there are solutions and foams and really light lotions, and in oils too, like that's really, really helpful. And you should bring that up with your care provider. Okay. And typically what we'll use is, those topical steroids, usually about once a day for a period of time, maybe sometimes some weekends off, because one of the risks with topical steroids is that it can thin the skin. So we want to be careful and about making sure that we're not just continuously using this for months and months and months.
Right.
We will also use an over-the-counter treatment called Minoxidil. It is also known as Rogaine, and more people have probably heard of it that way. That doesn't necessarily address the immune system and quiet down the immune system like a topical steroid would. But I kind of explain it's like fertilizer. So it's going to help your lawn grow a little bit, like help the hair grow a bit. Okay. There are also topical agents that can this sounds odd, but they can irritate the skin a little bit. And that can actually trick the immune system to kind of stop doing what it's doing, making the hair fall out. But those are definitely something that you have to work with your doctor with closely. And I would say just in general, alopecia areata, if you have access to a dermatologist, that's a really good reason to go see a dermatologist because they're going to be specialized in a lot of these topical treatments. Okay. So, and some of those irritating agents include tretinoin, anthralin, squaric acid. So just kind of knowing that those exist, I think, is an important thing. There are injections that we can do into the scalp, and that is typically with a steroid. And this is something that it is uncomfortable, I have to be honest. But there
doesn't sound very good.
It's not, no, it's horrible. But there are ways to make it so that it is not excruciating. So asking for numbing cream ahead of the time, something like Emla, which is a prescription topical lidocaine, or or another one called LMX, and putting that on a couple hours ahead of time, using ice, using vibration, using Child Life if it's available. So I really don't like to do injections without at least talking through those options with my patients. Okay. In terms of medicines by mouth, sometimes we'll use very, very brief courses of oral prednisone, but I really don't like to do this, especially in our patients with Down syndrome, because they are at risk for diabetes and other issues that can kind of not do so great with prednisone. So I don't really use that too much. The kind of up and coming oral treatment for alopecia areata is something called a JAK inhibitor. Okay. And there's actually clinical trials right now at University of Colorado looking at Down syndrome and JAK inhibitors with alopecia areata and other skin conditions, because you might remember me talking about that interferon thing, that like immune dysregulation. So JAK inhibitors actually block interferon. And out of all the treatments that we have for alopecia areata, that is the most successful one. And you can read about this. There's actually been some nice case reports of people with Down syndrome going on JAK inhibitors and their alopecia areata basically reversing itself. But, this is a clinical trial, right? So we don't know all the safety data with this. It's not available yet. Yeah. There has been hope that we could try to harness this mechanism and find a way to put it on topically, like put it in a cream. And wouldn't that be cool, right? You wouldn't have to take a medicine by mouth, but we're still trying to figure that all out. So as you can see with my 5-minute answer, there's things out there and, and it shouldn't just be like, oh, whatever, it's alopecia areata, let's move on. No, we should talk about some of these options and figure out what the best fit is for the individual. But there's definitely a lot out there. And then I will also say that many of my patients decide that they don't want to treat, or they've tried treatments and it's not effective. And it is sometimes upsetting to hear from a doctor, let's talk about a hair prosthetic, let's talk about a wig. And I will tell you, though, that so many of my patients have benefited tremendously from going to someone who really knows what they're doing with hair prosthesis, and they are just completely ecstatic and thrilled. Yeah. And so, I try not to have that conversation feel like it's a failure and this is the end of the road and this is all that's left, because it can be an extremely empowering thing to have in your life. I mean, I've had so many patients benefit from that tremendously. So, a lot of the times insurance companies with the diagnosis of alopecia areata will cover a wig through a store, that I would say more of like a medical hair prosthetic store. And so, because they can be very expensive out of pocket. So I would definitely talk to your provider about that, because that can be life-changing. I've had that happen with so many patients. So
And I could think of a couple of our students that where the alternate option is that they are just fine with they're just embracing the fact that the hair is never going to come back. So whatever your comfort level is, whatever your personal choice is, you can also just not worry about it and just be bald for the rest of your life and just rock
it. Right? Nope, so, that was going to be the last thing I was going to say. You can totally rock it. And I have so many patients who love rocking it. And that's great, and so that's why we always start with that quote: the treatment should never be worse than the condition itself. So even if that is a hair prosthetic and you just don't like the way it feels and it's itchy and you want to rock it, like rock it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, that was it was a really good overview of what's out there, because I think you're right. A lot of the times parents will be given one option from a dermatologist, and if it doesn't work, then they're just like, all right, we'll just give up. So there are lots of avenues to explore. I know that I've had a couple of parents that have tried alternative, like natural remedies, but obviously we know that that's your personal choice. Just try what you can. But it's nice to know that there's lots of medical options out there as well for them to explore. Great. Okay, so let's move on to another common thing that we notice with our population of individuals with Down syndrome, and that is damage on and around the fingernails. So sometimes, we see deep ridges or dents, or, really painful looking hangnails or skin damage. So what's going on over there?
I think there can be a lot of different things going on. So, alopecia areata, you can have associated nail findings with that, like nail pitting and ridging. So that might be part of it. You can see psoriasis of the nails, which psoriasis we think is a bit more common with alopecia areata. I'm sorry, with Down syndrome, excuse me. I also think that there's a bit more, we say in dermatology, like outside job, meaning like sometimes there's habit tics of wanting to pick or bite the nails. And that is a more challenging thing to actually, you guys are the pros at helping me with that. Talking with occupational therapy, and actually speech therapy too, because oftentimes it's caused because not really being able to articulate oneself and one's emotions, and it's done out of frustration. So I think there's like lots of different stuff that could be going on. And then, also like just more dry skin, and fragile skin.
Do you see more like fungal and bacterial infections on this kind of open skin that just linger? There's lingering, and it just looks so painful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, fungal infections, specifically, like athlete's foot, but that can also happen on the fingernails. That is way more common in Down syndrome. So certainly they could be getting something called onychomycosis, which is a fungal infection of the nails. Bacterial infections, that is like, I think they are more prone to certain bacterial infections, but that's something that's a bit more controversial.
Okay.
I think that COVID has not been very kind to many hands because we're just washing really frequently washing, and we're using hand sanitizers. Probably when I'm in the office, I hand sanitize my hands over 100 times a day, so that's been really challenging. I think that we can talk about potentially what we could talk about now is like good moisturizers.
Yeah.
Because I do think that the amount of dry skin that they have, and also with the amount of hand cleaning that they're having to do, that can be that could be a big help. Yeah. So there's lots of different kinds of moisturizers out there, right? Like you go to the store and you're like, I have dry skin. What am I going to buy? There's like 800 options. So I think to narrow it down, and obviously I'm not going to endorse any specific brands, but just some like good consumer knowledge. So there's 3 different levels of moisturizers that I like to talk about. Okay. So there's lotions that are in like a pump bottle. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the weakest option for you for moisturizing. Okay. That has the highest water and alcohol content. So if you have a kid with peeling fingers and, dry skin and soreness around the nails, you're not really going to want to choose a lotion, okay? Because it's not going to get us the barrier that we want. And the other thing is lotions can hurt on open skin, right? They sting, and we never want that to happen. So in general, I mean, lotions can be great as like an all over body moisturizer, but if we're really trying to address, specific dryness or sores on the hands, it's probably not the best choice. So anything in a pump bottle is probably not going to be the best purchase for you. So, okay. So the second level of moisturizers are creams, right? And so those typically come in jars. They sometimes come in tubes. They are a little bit thicker than lotions, but they can still, when you rub them in, they vanish pretty quickly. Okay. So, and they don't feel sticky and goopy. All right. So for a lot of people who don't like that tactile, kind of more sticky, goopy sensation, a cream is the way to go. And I would say for a lot of patients, that's the one that they would prefer. So looking for something in a tube or a jar that says cream is helpful. Now, the other thing to mention is just because something says baby on it doesn't mean that it's like good. I know that it's like good for sensitive skin. Yeah. Okay. So, baby products oftentimes, well, number one, they're more expensive. And number two, they have a lot of hidden fragrances in them, like lavender. And, I often say, even separate from Down syndrome, if the moisturizer makes your baby, quote, smell like a baby, it's probably not good for your dry skin eczema baby, So that is just like kind of buyer beware. Just because it says baby doesn't mean that it's a great fit. Okay. So the strongest moisturizers we have out there are ointments or oils. All right. And so that would be something like petroleum jelly or like coconut oil, like Vaseline. Okay. So oftentimes when we're talking about like sores on the fingers, using an ointment, your strongest barrier, your strongest moisturizer is probably going to be the best way to go. Now, I a lot of the times will demonstrate this for patients in the office because they're like, great, Dr. Rork, you want me to lather myself in Vaseline? That's disgusting. Like, how am I supposed to like communicate on my iPad and on my phone and like open the door, right? Like, yuck. And I think in Down syndrome, there's a huge range of like either being hyposensitive or hypersensitive, and we really have to pay attention to that. So what I demonstrate is just because I'm saying you moisturize with Vaseline doesn't mean that you put like an ice cream scoop worth of Vaseline on your palm and like spread it all over, right? Like you're putting like a pea-sized amount, like a very, very tiny amount. And oftentimes I say, do this right after you wash the hands or hand sanitize the hands, put a little teeny bit on, and just really quickly while the hands are still a little bit damp, like emulsify it onto your hands. And you will see that it doesn't leave a lot of residue. It's not super sticky, and it's really going to help with, protecting your skin and the skin around your nails. So I think that is like a huge thing we can all be doing right now with COVID and hand sanitizing and hand cleaning. So.
And I think it's important to
scoops.
No ice cream
scoops.
Targeted. And that's the thing. I feel like if it's made into a routine, especially for our guys, it's much easier for them to do it more often because it's not just a once a day kind of thing. I'm personally hate the feeling of my hands after I wash them when they feel that dryness, and I immediately go for I'm using lotion level, but now that I've learned more, might go into the second level of, so I'm also benefiting from this. But I think for our parents that are like, oh, they're never going to do that, or they're not going to want to do that, it's slow but surely we can get them used to, getting used to that feeling of the Vaseline or the glycerin on their hands, and getting them to understand why they're doing it and what the benefit of it is. And then
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think like something like Vaseline, it's so easy to find those teeny tiny containers, just like having one of those in a school bag or a purse is really, really, really easy. I would also say with like soap, and that's tricky, right? Because we need to use more antibacterial soaps right now with COVID, but like it kind of goes into that same thing of like, if it makes your baby smell like a baby, like don't put it on your hands, but like if it makes you smell like a lavender explosion, like afterwards, it's like probably not the best thing for sensitive skin.
Yeah.
So, and that's a hard thing to control. I'm not saying you need to like carry around like hand soap, but in the home, it can be a fairly easy thing to try to control. So so awesome. I think you guys, that's such an awesome question. There's just like a huge range of what it could be, but I think like the general like skincare for dry, sore, cracked skin can be helpful.
Great. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to move on to another thing that we've noticed. Our students tend to get rashes on their faces more frequently, especially around the mouth. So what should a family do if they're noticing this happening?
Yes, this is a huge reason why people come to our office.
I bet.
And so let me just talk for a minute about like why that's probably happening. And then we'll talk about like specific diagnoses and just some like pearls on each. With Down syndrome, there's often decreased oral tone, so that the muscles around the mouth are just a little bit more relaxed. And I'm not the pro on that, having a speech therapist on, but what that causes is just more saliva to exit the mouth, like while speaking or even while resting. And saliva is a wonderful thing, but it contains a lot of enzymes, which means it contains a lot of things that help us break down our food and keep our mouth healthy. And when that is frequently around the mouth, on the skin around the mouth or on the lips, it can cause a lot of problems. For a lot of people with Down syndrome, they also do have a larger tongue, which can also contribute to more saliva exiting the mouth, on the lips, and the skin around the mouth. And so kind of with all of that said, there's a variety of different skin issues that we can see. So one of the more common ones I see are just really severely dry, cracked lips. Okay. And then in that same category, we see something called angular cheilitis, which means right at the corner of the mouth, you get these sores, which are extremely uncomfortable and painful. So in terms of the dry, cracked, sore lips, a lot of that is happening just from the saliva itself. And so when we're going to talk about treatment, we're going to go back to what we were just talking about strengths of moisturizers. So I oftentimes say, like, we need to be using an ointment, maybe not like, no offense to cherry lip balm, but like maybe not like something really fruity, like lip glossy, maybe we do need to just be using Vaseline and really avoiding fragrances and trying to do that actually right before bed is super helpful. Okay.
before sleep when your tone is even, well, your face is relaxed. So
yeah, well,
if you
your
have a
face is
saliva
relaxed.
issue,
Yeah.
you have more of a saliva issue.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's also, you're obviously not like wiping it as much at nighttime. So doing it before naps, doing it before bedtime. I would say and it depends on how extreme your lips are, but like doing it before you eat can be helpful, especially if you're going to be eating a nice big bowl of pasta sauce, or pizza that
Messy
has
stuff,
more acidic foods. More acidic foods can be huge. Okay. So for a lot of people, just trying to come up again with some system with using an ointment more regularly around the mouth can be helpful. Now, with those little sores on the corner of the mouth, angular cheilitis, as you guys had brought up, there is more fungal infections that we can see in Down syndrome and potentially bacterial infections. There has actually been a study that says that people with Down syndrome may grow more candida, which is a specific kind of bacteria in the mouth. And that candida bacteria actually contributes to those little sores, that angular cheilitis. So it's a mix of saliva and bacteria yeast kind of having a little party at the corner of the mouth. So ouch, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different contributors for that. So what I would tell you with that, good pearls to like talk to providers about are that oftentimes using a very low potency topical steroid for a brief period of time to the corners of the mouth just to help with the inflammation can be extremely helpful. And then in addition to that, kind of mixing in an antifungal or an antibacterial ointment. Okay. So I often do like a 2 squirt treatment. Like I do a little squirt, a topical steroid, a little squirt of an antifungal, mix it up and you put it on the corners of your mouth, 2 to 3 times a day for about a week or 2. And for a lot of people that
should take care of it.
Should be enough. Yep. And then when you start seeing it come back, do that treatment for a couple of days and then, go from there.
Is there any indication that families would know whether it would be a fungal or bacterial infection, or does it really look the same?
So I would say bacterial infections tend to be more like crusty and weepy. So, and I would say a fungal infection, and this is a huge generalization, but a fungal infection is usually a bit more like red, open and sore, and there's not as much like crust. So, specifically a bacteria like staph bacteria, just like stuck, we use all these gross terms in dermatology, but it causes like a honey golden crust. And so that's a little bit more indicative, really gross, right? But it's true when you look at pictures of it. Yeah. So if it's crusty, I'd be worried about an infection. So that's good for people to know about, those like possibility of doing combination treatments.
And I think it's so important that you said that it's painful, because our students would not necessarily communicate. But it could be a really distracting and irritating factor in their daily life that doesn't have to
especially like around the mouth when you're eating. Every time you eat, it hurts. Every time you talk, it hurts. Every time you yawn, it hurts, right?
So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I get angular cheilitis like with the season change here in New Hampshire really frequently. And it's like the week that I have it, I'm just miserable. It's awful. It's very painful. And I would say with mask wearing, a lot of the angular cheilitis, the bad chapped lips are just more common because of, saliva being around the mouth. So, and then let's move on to the skin around the mouth, because there's one other skin condition I want to talk about that we see quite a bit. That's called perioral dermatitis. And perioral dermatitis, we don't know exactly what causes it. We do think that sometimes using inhaled corticosteroids can trigger it off. So like a topical steroid kind of around the mouth, or an inhaled topical steroid around the mouth, which we see a bit more common in our patients with Down syndrome who have asthma or have pulmonary issues when they're using an inhaled corticosteroid. So, but at the same time, you can also get it from increased saliva around the mouth. Like we see it pretty frequently, I would say, from that too. So, so perioral dermatitis looks like lots of little bumps, little pink bumps around the mouth. A lot of people think, oh my goodness, is this acne? And there's some subtleties to tell the difference, but no, it's usually not acne, especially if it's in a school-age child. You can also get perioral dermatitis. The name is a bit deceiving. You can get little bumps kind of around the nostrils and around the eyes. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So the big pearl with, if you think your loved one, or if you think that you have perioral dermatitis, don't let someone automatically just say, oh, it looks like an eczema rash, put some topical steroid on it and it'll go away. Because, oh man, it might make it better for like a week, but then it will keep smoldering and then it'll get worse. Yeah. So we say like topical steroids are a frenemy. Like they look like a friend, but they're really an enemy for perioral derm. And so there's lots of treatments for perioral dermatitis. There's topical antibiotics. There's another medicine called tacrolimus. There's oral antibiotics. It's a condition that we can treat. Sometimes you have to trial and error a couple of things, but it is definitely something to be aware of with Down syndrome. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
I knew there was a lot of things. This is just confirming. So this seems so
yes.
There's a lot of things. Okay.
There's a lot of things around the mouth.
Absolutely. One thing that I think people might show up around the mouth, but it doesn't necessarily, are skin conditions related to celiac disease. Because celiac, as we know, is more common in people with Down syndrome. Can you talk a little bit about how celiac affects the skin? What often happens here, I'll give you the context in clinic, is a family might be querying celiac disease. It's been put on their radar, and their child's skin also has, huge rashes, things like that. Yep. And once you get a gluten-free diet going, then the skin also clears up. So can you chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a kind of diagnostic rash for celiac disease that we call dermatitis herpetiformis. It's a big, long word.
Great names.
I know. Just Latin everywhere today.
It is. I know it is. I know. I often say like in dermatology, we're all kind of amateur linguists because of all the silly things that we like to say. So we can just call it DH. So dermatitis herpetiformis. So that is a rash that is intimately related with celiac. I mean, it's basically diagnostic for it. It is oftentimes on the butt, on the backs of the arms, on the backs of the legs. It has a very particular look to it. It's like very, very bright red little bumps, and sometimes they're kind of open and a little bit crusted. I will tell you that a lot of people come to my office worried that they have celiac disease when they have little teeny tiny bumps on the backs of their arms that look like chicken skin. Keratosis pilaris, which you do see in Down syndrome. That is just like, that's the most common form of dry skin in Caucasians. And oftentimes, rightfully so, I mean, because it's hard to differentiate between all these conditions. People are like, oh my gosh, is this a sign of celiac? So I would say keratosis pilaris, like, no, I'm not really worried about that. But yeah, so if you do have DH, dermatitis herpetiformis, if you remove gluten from the diet, you will see that rash kind of dissipate. And sometimes removing gluten from the diet isn't enough. Sometimes we have to use other treatments too to help it. But certainly the skin can teach us about celiac. Yeah.
Are there other dietary conditions that also relate or have sort of their counterparts on the skin? So if there's other allergies or intolerances, etc., do you notice those in skin conditions, or is it just with celiacs?
No, I would say there's other examples. I mean, I think that we previously overemphasized the relationship with food allergy and eczema. That is actually, and there's definitely certain forms of eczema that we do see present on the skin, and it means that there may be like an associated allergy. But I would say oftentimes, and for the most part, having food allergies and having eczema, they're not like contributing to each other.
Okay.
They may be like kind of walking side to side, and they happen together, but they don't contribute to each other. Yeah. And another common thing we see with like food, I would say, are like nutritional deficiencies. So people who are not eating certain amounts of vitamins and minerals, we can see signs of that on the skin. Like zinc deficiency or vitamin C deficiency, scurvy, but yeah, so we definitely can see the health of the body and the food that it's receiving. It can express itself through the skin.
Okay. Are there any other super common dermatological issues that you see kind of every day in your office that you think should be on the radar of sort of the families that are going to be listening here?
Yeah. So I think a couple. So one of the most common reasons why people come to my office are for pimples on the backs of their thighs and on their bottom, something we call folliculitis. That is extremely common in Down syndrome, and can be very uncomfortable and very itchy. When we look at like large case studies of skin conditions in Down syndrome, this is usually the thing that's like highest on the list. Like most people coming to a dermatologist will come in for this reason. And that is a condition that for a lot of people can be treated with like over-the-counter benzoyl peroxide wash or Hebacleanse wash pretty regularly in the shower. So it's something that can certainly be addressed. Another common reason why people come to my office, and I definitely want to talk about today, is something called hidradenitis suppurativa, or HS. I know, another crazy term.
Just trying to wrap my head around that one.
No,
yeah, HS.
Painful.
Yeah.
HS is extremely painful. So the way I like to describe this, at least on a podcast, is like extreme acne in the armpits and the groin area, but acne to the point where you're getting open, weeping wounds and sores. Okay. So this is actually, within the last 5 to 10 years, has really come to the forefront of like dermatology literature in Down syndrome. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? Why are we seeing so many people with HS and Down syndrome? And so I'm excited that there's like momentum behind this. But that said, it's very frequent. People will come into my office and they'll have this and they'll be like, nobody told me what this was. They've just said it was boils or it was staph infections, for years. So we have to do more education about it. So hidradenitis tends to happen younger in Down syndrome. So even like pre-adolescent years, they can start developing these sores in the armpits, under the breasts, and the private area.
So it's like a chafing related, anything that's rubbing.
It's actually, that's a great question. So it's not as much chafing related. It's truly like an immune reaction, kind of immune dysregulation. Again, kind of going back to this interferon, I think there's components of your microbiome and interaction with bacteria in the outside world. And if you actually look at, when you look at pictures of this, it's like huge pimples,
I've looked,
open sores. Yeah. And so while clothing and chafing can contribute to it, like I think there's a lot more to it with Down syndrome. So it's gotten to the point where we think that this is so much more common with Down syndrome that the hidradenitis foundations in both Canada and the United States have recommended annual screening of people with Down syndrome. Okay.
Great.
So, yeah. So, now there was not a specific recommendation about age. And so I work with a bunch of awesome pediatric dermatologists on Down syndrome, and we've kind of said collectively, how about 10? How about 10 years old? Because it seems to present earlier. So just encouraging, providers to like look in the armpits and look in the groin area is really, really important. So in hidradenitis, there's lots of different treatments. And that's one of those conditions, much like alopecia areata, you don't want someone just to throw their hands up and be like, I can't fix this, because there's washes, there's topical prescriptions, there's oral medications, there's injectable medications like something called Humira. There's clinical trials at, University of Colorado with those JAK inhibitors for this. So there's lots of different things that we can do. It is a very uncomfortable condition that we definitely need to be addressing.
One of the things, like when you were talking about folliculitis, one of the things that's tricky for our guys is good hygiene. Like they're very in and out of the shower and they don't want to take baths. Right. Would a good routine with that particular part of the hygiene would help in managing a lot of the skin conditions?
A lot of it does. And so that was actually something I wanted to bring up, that like the biggest, most important thing for your dermatologist to do is to sit down with you and figure out, like, how often are you bathing? Who's helping you? Do you like water? Do you not like water? Do you like showers? Do you like baths? Do you like foamy stuff? Do you like regular old bar soap? And because that is going to make or break the success of a lot of this. And I think just being like open and honest. And I always say to people, like, you're not going to get in trouble with what you're telling me. I'm just trying to like figure out how to help you, Yeah. So if you only take a shower twice a week, maybe I'm going to use a slightly stronger medicated, shampoo or body wash, right? So bathing routine is so helpful to understand and to be honest about when talking about these treatments. And, it's hard. Like, it's hard to get into good routines. And I always say too, a lot of the times when I meet a patient, like, we find a couple different things on the skin that they might want to address. And you could walk out of my office with this elaborate, like 10-point plan. And guess what? Like, it's just not going to happen. I know it wouldn't happen if you gave it to me, right? Like, let's focus on one thing. So if it's if it's the bumps on your bottom and your thighs that are bugging you, then like, we're going to focus on that. We're going to try to get you into a routine, understand your routine to address that. So I try to be very, reasonable and practical with that. I think dandruff too, just talking about like other things we didn't touch upon, dandruff is a super common reason to come in and see me. And I think one of the most important things for parents to know is that there are medicated prescription shampoos for bad dandruff. You don't need to just be in like Head and Shoulders, Selsun Blue Land. There are prescriptions like ketoconazole 2% shampoo, cyclopirox shampoo. A lot of the times, even knowing how to use the over-the-counters properly can help. Okay. So I always say, when we're talking about dandruff and we're talking about shampoos, we're talking about medicine for the skin on your head. I don't, your hair, like, whatever, we can wash your hair with other things afterwards. These shampoos, like, they need to get on your head. And so really massaging them in on the scalp, and then ideally letting them sit for at least 1 or 2 minutes. And we oftentimes talk about like, how practical is that? How are we going to do that?
For a song.
Totally. We talk about songs all the time. Like, you need to pick a song and sing a song. I think that is really, really helpful, just knowing how to use these, because a lot of the times, how are you supposed to know? You like get a shampoo or even get a prescription shampoo and you quickly like kind of fluff it around your hair and then you rinse it out. It's like, whoa. So you can actually use regular shampoos on your hair to wash your hair after you use these medicated shampoos. The other thing is there is some role for topical steroids sometimes with bad dandruff, just for, maybe once a week, brief periods of time. Natural alternatives like tea tree oil, those can be extremely helpful, like exploring those with your provider. I will also say that people with Down syndrome tend to get a form of like facial dandruff a little bit more commonly, like scaling in the eyebrows and around the nose, and using a lot of those anti-dandruff shampoos can be helpful with that.
Oh, good to know.
So, yeah.
Okay. Are there resources that you point people in the direction of, good websites or information that's available so that people can kind of sort through? Because we've covered a lot of things.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
And,
so,
before you jump in on that too, Dr. Rork, but I was just going to say that in the healthcare guidelines, there's nothing about dermatology in there. Am I correct? Because I was just looking through them a few minutes ago, and like especially when you were talking about the screening for the HS. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I have to say that's not because the doctors who have like written these guidelines don't want to do that. It's because I mean, like Marilyn. Well, I mean, we've talked to each other about this. There's just not a lot of like good data out there. So it's like very hard for them to put it in guidelines. And so, it's not there. Yeah. In terms of resources, like we're on it, like we're working on this. So I know with that review article that we just published in August, that there's going to be an associated patient parent handout.
Nice.
Published through the Society for Pediatric Dermatology on hidradenitis. It is our goal and our dream with like multiple other, with other, Down syndrome advocacy communities to kind of build upon those handouts. So I would say like, it's coming.
Super.
I've done other podcasts. So I did one, and I you guys probably don't mind that I say this, but like one with Kishore Valodi out of Pittsburgh, where we actually like talk through pictures, which I think could be a helpful resource.
Sure.
I know that probably pretty soon there's going to be a 2-part lecture series released through Boston Children's Hospital that I've like put together that actually goes through like treatment slides, so you can have a lot of the names of these conditions. But I do think that like those handouts are going to be huge, and we're just in the process of kind of getting them out there.
Should people check back at Geisel or UMass?
Yeah, totally. So we are just actually week after, we're starting a Down syndrome skin clinic at Dartmouth. And awesome. We have a kind of nascent little baby website right now, but like we eventually are going to have all of our patient handouts and all of the lectures and all of that compiled on that website. So, we're working hard to get all those resources out there.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, this might be a weird question, but do most dermatologists in general have a good understanding of some of these conditions like folliculitis and HS? So like, because obviously you specialize in DS and we don't have very many of Dr. Jillian Rorks around the world. So would parents, when they go to their dermatologist, would most of them be aware of these things and aware of the treatments that you mentioned?
Yes, I would say like, fortunately, a lot of these skin conditions are like common things that a dermatologist would see. And so, and I've talked about that. Actually, I just had a group of families speak with first-year medical students a couple of weeks ago. And that was like a message from 2 of the families to these young doctors. It's like, just because my kid has Down syndrome and like you don't specialize in Down syndrome doesn't mean that you can't help him.
Yeah.
Great. I would say this, right? Like I would say the same things with these skin conditions. If we were to put these on up on a PowerPoint slide of all the skin conditions I just talked about, like, dermatologists can handle these things. And I would say, myself and a lot of my colleagues, we are trying to educate more dermatologists about this. So Dr. Christy Holland and myself just gave a talk at the American Academy of Dermatology for, I think, well over an hour about a lot of these conditions. So we're trying to get more information out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I would say totally just go talk to a local dermatologist and
maybe great info to bring to that dermatologist then.
Yeah,
is my
totally.
student or my child prefers foam or doesn't like sticky
Right.
hands, or, you know, bring
Right.
those things to them.
Yep.
And hopefully you can find some workarounds. It seems like there's lots of treatment options available.
Oh, definitely.
So-
Yeah, definitely. And I would say dermatology is like an extremely small world. So like, you know, we all kind of find each other if we need each other. So, you know, go get help. They can help you.
Yeah. And we'll put a link on our episode page, in addition to what Dr. Rork mentioned, to the Down Syndrome Clinic to You resource that Dr. Scott because that's a really great resource for parents where you can enter information about your child or adult, and it gives you all the questions to take to your doctor. It gives you the resources that you can arm yourself with when you go see a dermatologist that may not have experience with Down syndrome, so that at least you can be like, hey, I heard folliculitis is very common. What can I do about it? So yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, that's such an awesome program. It's really, really good.
Yeah, so. I'm glad he put that. Well, not he, just him, but the whole team put that.
Whole team, yeah.
Well, we hugely appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Rork. You've been very educative. We've had a grand time with you. So
learned a lot. Gosh, thank you.
That's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.